consequences. I'm a 57-year-old woman, and 35 years is a long time to grieve. Healing is a process, and I still have a while to go, but I still don't have the courage to tell my 2 adult children. But it's liberating to tell my story to you today. I only hope that it'll prevent someone else from this painful experience. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
My name is Carol Marie, and I've had 2 abortions. My first abortion was during my senior year in high school, and I aborted my child to hide the fact that I was not a virgin. It was the 70s, a time when the hip culture told us that it was a modern experience to love through sex without marriage. And yet the so-called vestiges of a day gone by told us that nice girls didn't do that. I wanted to be seen as a nice girl, and so my child paid the price of my refusal to be honest about my situation. I remember very little about the actual procedure. I went to Kaiser down here in Santa Clara and was sedated, so I didn't consciously feel the speculum or hear the suction. But what I do remember is telling Craig, the father, that I was pregnant and waiting to see his reaction. We'd already broken up before I knew I was pregnant, and I knew I didn't love him. But I also knew that it was his child and that he needed to be part of the decision-making process. I think I was relieved at the time that he didn't encourage me to spare our child. Now, I wish more than anything that he'd stepped up to protect our baby, as any father should. I remember my best friend Janet telling me to go to Planned Parenthood and that they'd help me take care of it. I remember the dingy waiting room and the so-called counseling that simply confirmed me in my focus on abortion, never offering me information on choices. Only one choice mattered there. I remember after the procedure was done that the father of the kids I babysat, who was a Kaiser doctor, called my name as I walked away from the recovery ward, and I told my boyfriend to ignore him as though he had the wrong person. I've often wondered, was he my abortionist? You see, when you get an abortion, you most likely never talk to that doctor who kills your child. There is no doctor-patient relationship. He does his business and he moves on, paying little attention to his so-called patient. My second abortion was several years later, while I was in college. This time I knew I did not want an abortion. But my fiance and my doctor, who had recently ordered an x-ray that had exposed my child to radiation, they both pressured me until I caved to their insistence. And once again, I experienced that lie that is called a choice. I never had that large family I'd always wanted. They told me I could have my family when I was ready. And I can't help but know that God had twice offered me a better path towards fulfillment. My memories of the days each of my children died are vague, most likely as a defense mechanism against the traumas that I'd still rather not remember. I was sold abortion as a solution to my problem, a means to an end. I now know without a doubt that I was sold a pack of lies. And this is why I say the time has come to recall abortion.
All righty, Vicki.
My name is Vicki. I'm from Calaveras County, California. I had 2 abortions in the early 1970s. At that time, it was only, okay. At that time, abortion was only legal in New York and Massachusetts, New York and California. I lived in Massachusetts. It was a long time ago, but sometimes it seems like yesterday. Some things about them I will never forget. I was pregnant both times by the same man. He did not want to get married. If my parents had even found out that I was sexually active, let alone pregnant, they would die. These were enough reasons for me to choose abortion. My boyfriend went with me for the first one. The second one he did not know about. I remember the procedure itself and feeling very removed from my body when it was done. I remember nothing after the first one, but after the second one, I remember trying to console a woman who was crying after her procedure. I stayed at a hotel in New York City that night and could not get warm. I called the front desk and asked them to check the heater. There was nothing wrong with it. I was freezing, chills passing through my body like a knife. It was a sensation that would return to me many times over the years. The next day on the bus going home, I felt a huge emptiness inside, and I cried out to God to never let me do this ever again. I got pregnant again by the same man. God honored my prayer and gave me another choice. I moved to California, and my son was adopted here in San Francisco. For years, I struggled to make something of my life. I married a man I met in a support group. We were both mourning the loss of a child, his by divorce, mine by adoption. I did not recognize my losses by abortion. I had another son, and my stepson came to live with us. I was still not happy. I did not know what was wrong. I thought it was about the adoption, but an astute pregnancy center counselor said it was more likely about the abortions. I didn't want to go there. I worked and worked to be the perfect wife and mother and stepmother. I overachieved constantly at my work. I was still miserable, and my children and husband knew that what people saw on the outside was not who I really was. I took the training to be a pregnancy center volunteer and was told I would have to go through the post-abortion Bible study before I could counsel. I thank God they made that rule, and I believe they made it when they saw me coming. I was the first one who volunteered after they made that rule, and I thank God, I thank God, and I thank God for that rule. Finally, through this Bible study, I began to see how the abortions had affected me. I let myself feel the incredible grief I had for the babies I had aborted. I saw how my relationships, with my husband and my children were marred because I could not let myself get close to anyone. I could only punish myself because of what I had done. I began to heal. The truth that Jesus had paid the price for me with his blood began to be real to me. I did the study a second time a few years later and accepted his complete forgiveness and restoration. I knew then, as I do now, that my babies are with Jesus in heaven, and I will see them there someday. I do not get that chilled sensation anymore, even standing up here speaking in front of all of you. I thought for so long that I should never have been born, but now I know his purpose for me is to lead other women in healing Bible study. I have met and know so many women and men like myself who have struggled for years and did not know why, and this is the reason I will be silent no more.
Thank you, Vicki. Right. You're with Carol Marie. Yes. Yes. Right.
My name is Teresa Cobb. I grew up in Southern California, and I had my abortion, my first abortion, when I was 14 years old. Things like sex and abortion were not talked about in my home. I was exposed to pornography at a very young age, so when Planned Parenthood became active in our school and neighborhood, I heard the message loud and clear that my sex life was my own, to do with whatever I wanted. I found out I was pregnant in the summer between my 8th and 9th grade year. I was very sick during my pregnancy, so as my 18-year-old boyfriend and I walked down to our local Planned Parenthood office, I threw up all the way. There I was told that because I was less than 12 weeks pregnant, what I had inside me was nothing more than a mass of cells, a blob of flesh. They told me that I could get my abortion paid for at the welfare office. They gave me directions to that office as well as directions to the nearest abortion clinic. My boyfriend and I left Planned Parenthood never really questioning what we were about to do. We'd known others who'd had abortions. Besides that, it was legal, right? We walked to the welfare office. I told the woman behind the glass that I needed an abortion. She had us wait a while until a social worker called me into the back. She asked me for an ID and a social security card, neither of which I had. In fact, I didn't even know my social security number at the time. I explained that I couldn't ask my mother what my social security number was because I wasn't about to tell her that I was pregnant. The social worker appeared to feel sorry for me, as I must have looked green and was throwing up in her trash can. She approved the funds for my abortion. No ID, no social security number. Truthfully, I don't remember much about the abortion itself. I don't remember much about the next abortion I went on to have either. Nothing really mattered to me after that. I became promiscuous, I smoked a lot of pot, and I drank a lot. I never told anybody about my abortions, not even my husband much later on when we decided to abort our child, having gotten pregnant only months after having twins. This was to be my third abortion. I hated being pregnant. I was always sick. I felt disabled. Being pregnant and sick always made me feel 14 again and reminded me of my first abortion. I was resentful, and so I was afraid that I wouldn't love my children. A life of shame was all I knew. I was even ashamed of my thoughts. Nobody really knew me. I had completely buried my abortions. I was out of control fun one minute and out of control angry the next. I hurt anyone I could get my hands on, especially the men in my life. I felt unworthy of love and deserving of punishment. After the abortions, the fact that it was legal brought me no comfort, yet I justified my abortions by counseling my girlfriends to get them. In 2005, I became pregnant with my son, and I was very excited this time since I had a new perspective because I had come to know Jesus as my Savior. I was so excited that I went in for an ultrasound very early in the pregnant, just 5 weeks. I was completely stunned when I saw the ultrasound with his tiny beating heart. I had no idea. At that time, I understood Christ's sacrifice and his forgiveness, but suddenly I realized that I didn't really know what I was being forgiven for. My husband passed away a short time later, which freed me to start researching what abortion really was. You see, my husband died never knowing about the other abortions. I began attending Forgiven and Set Free Bible Study. And in that study, God spoke to me directly from his word. And he said in Isaiah 54:4, "Fear not, you will no longer live in shame. Don't be afraid, there is no more disgrace for you. You will no longer remember the shame of your youth and the sorrows of widowhood." He, on the cross, had truly set me free. I learned that he not only paid for my future, but he paid for my past. That he bought me and he owns me, all of my pain, and that he will use it all for good and his glory if I'd only give it to him. God took these questions. Why didn't anybody tell me that my babies were alive and had beating hearts? Why was Planned Parenthood allowed to lie to me? How is this even legal? Where were all the Christians? And he turned me into an answer. God has used my story to save lives and heal hearts, and I want so much to tell anyone who will listen that he wants to do the same with their story. And that is why I'm silent no more.
Thank you, sweetie. Okay.
Good morning, or good afternoon. My name is Deborah. I'm here to share the truth about abortion and how it negatively impacted my life. I suffered emotionally, physically, and spiritually from 2 abortions. After years of suffering, I attended a post-abortion healing retreat, and my journey of healing and restoration with myself, my aborted children, and God began. Almost 30 years ago, I had my first abortion. I was living at home, attending college, and working part-time. I was not married, and I believed I was in a real crisis. I was ashamed, afraid to tell my parents, and felt I needed to protect them from humiliation and disappointment. My boyfriend encouraged me to keep the pregnancy a secret, which I did. I believe his own fear, immaturity, ignorance, and selfishness led him to say he wasn't ready to become a father, he wouldn't marry me or support me, that I would have to drop out of college, would end up on welfare, and that a child would ruin my life and his. I reflected on his words and thought about my life. I grew up in a divorced family and witnessed the loss and pain of not having my father in the home. In my heart, I never wanted to get divorced or have my children grow up without a father because I understood the pain of divorce. The thought of dropping out of college and raising a child in similar circumstances like I had been raised was too hard to bear. After all, I believed I was attending college to make a better life for myself. Adoption was a fleeting thought. I wasn't aware of any agencies and didn't know where to turn for help. In my own ignorance, I believed adoption was a worse decision, and the thought of giving my child up for adoption was too painful. So with much fear, hesitation, and regret, I called Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood, I couldn't even say the word abortion. I called to make an appointment to terminate my pregnancy. I did not believe in abortion, and it went against my Christian beliefs and morals. Sadly, 2 years later, we found ourselves in the same situation, and I knew what was expected. Regretfully, I underwent a second abortion. The 2 abortions would turn out to be the worst decisions of my life. I now recognize that I too was acting out of fear, immaturity, ignorance, selfishness, and coercion. On the day of the procedure, Planned Parenthood told me it was a blob of tissue and seemed more interested in collecting my $200 cash payment than my emotional well-being. Planned Parenthood did not inform me of the developmental stage of my unborn child, nor tell me that my child's heart was beating. They did not tell me they were going to kill the life of the unborn child growing inside me. When they witnessed me crying, they didn't encourage me to go home and really think about the decision I was making, but rather said it was a simple procedure that would be over in a few minutes. They didn't tell me this decision would negatively impact the rest of my life, that I may regret it, that I may suffer shame, anger, and grief, and that my future fertility could be jeopardized. They didn't tell me of any of this. I cried so many tears before, during, and after the procedure. After the procedure, it felt as if a part of me died. I now realize how true these feelings were. 2 innocent lives were snuffed out at the hands of the doctors, and now my soul was left in a terrible state to suffer the consequences. Abortion did not make me unpregnant. It made me the mother of children who died unnatural deaths. There is a saying, abortion, 1 dead, 1 wounded. My children were dead, and I was deeply wounded. I felt very much alone with the memories of my experience and trauma, and tried for so long not to think or talk about it, and suffered for years in silence. In order to cope with everyday life, I had to pretend that everything was fine, so I buried the pain deep within me. I had a secret I didn't want anyone to know. My relationship with God was greatly affected. I could not forgive myself. I believed that God could not forgive me, and that I had committed the unforgivable sin. 13 years ago, I was invited to attend a post-abortion healing retreat through Rachel's Vineyard. It was one of the best decisions of my life and one of the greatest experiences. The invitation came at the perfect time. I had been struggling and suffering deep sorrow for many years concerning infertility, and this seemed to exacerbate my regret and remorse for my abortions. Attending the retreat helped me to heal the pain of the abortions and lessened some of the sorrow associated with not being able to conceive